This is Here's How, Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast, presented by William Campbell.
Thank you for downloading episode 19 of Here's How. In this podcast, an extended discussion on one of the most troubled issues in Ireland. Following the Carrick Mines fire, the resistance to rehousing the survivors, the issue is travellers.
Here's How is Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast. Make your view heard. Just dial 076 603 5060 and tell the world what you're thinking. Your voicemail may be included in the next podcast. You can find tips on recording your contribution and other ways to contact the show at here'show.ie/call.
The Pavee Point Traveller and Roma Centre is the main advocacy group for travellers in Ireland. The co-director is Martin Collins and he's on the line with me now. Martin, has anybody ever knocked on your door to consult with you about whether they'd like to move into your street or not?
No, they have not. Not in my lifetime, they haven't. So I therefore, find it very difficult to understand and accept why local residents associations would want to be consulted or be informed about a traveller site being located in their area. But having said that, I do think it's important that local communities, whether it's the settled community or the traveller community, are consulted. I think dialogue is quite important, and I think people should be working together collectively, to try and address whatever issues, perceived or otherwise people may have. So I would fully support and encourage, a consultation process, a dialogue between the different stakeholders, whether that's in relation to, accommodation for settled people, or whether it's in relation to accommodation for travellers, or indeed whether it's in relation to, roads development or factories or shops or other infrastructure getting developed in whatever area.
Sure, but we have the planning process. Some areas are zoned for housing, some aren't. There's no validity, though, is there, to consulting with somebody as to who moves into their street?
Well, I would separate a consultation with people having a veto. And usually, when I hear local residents associations talking about consultation, usually that's a euphemism for saying no. And that's not consultation as far as I'm concerned. I don't define that as consultation. I do believe, as I say, that consultation and dialogue between all the stakeholders, it is the only way forward. I don't think imposing anything on anybody is the right way to go. As I say, I think it is important that people sit down, that we engage in dialogue, we listen to each other's points of view, each other's concerns, whether real or perceived, and then, find a basis of moving forward.
Okay. Obviously, we're talking about that in the context of the resistance from some local residents to the survivors of the Carrick Mines fire being rehoused close to them. But I think that probably most people in the general population don't have an idea of what it's like to be a traveller. Can you, just from your own personal experience, have you experienced other discrimination of that sort?
Unfortunately, the scenes that we witnessed in the last couple of weeks, in particular in relation to the residents in Rockfield Drive, they're not new. Whenever traveller accommodation is being proposed by a local authority, there has always been objections. Okay, residents have always tried to block traveller accommodation from being located in what they perceive as their area, when in fact in many cases travellers are being just as long, living in those areas.
But personally, can you tell any personal stories of things that have happened to you?
Oh, look, I'm 49 years of age. I've experienced discrimination so many times over those years. In school, being called a knacker, and it's actually gone on now to the second generation, because my son Dean is in secondary school in Ratholt Community College. And in the last 12 months, he has been called a dirty knacker on 4 different occasions.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and he has come home very upset, very emotional, and he doesn't want to go back to school. But I think education is quite important, so I encourage him to go back to school. I've talked to the principal and the board of management, and I've tried to have the issues dealt with. Unfortunately, that's not an isolated incident. Young traveller boys and girls, the Linton bred of this country, in the playground, in the school classroom, are being referred to and are being called scummy knackers, and it's having a huge psychological and emotional impact on their well-being. I've been refused access to pubs. My daughter got married, last year, and I found it hugely difficult to get a hotel for the reception. I was refused three different hotels. So yeah, discrimination, unfortunately, is almost a daily experience for many travellers, the Linton bred of this country, in their daily lives, trying to navigate the system, the health system, the social welfare system, dealing with local authorities around accommodation issues. We see the media, also being propagated racism being propagated in the mainstream media.
For example?
Well, if you look at the events of the last couple of weeks, of that terrible tragedy in Carrickmines where 10 people lost their lives, we see some media, portraying travellers, stereotyping all travellers as being antisocial, being criminal, causing litter pollution, and so forth.
Mm-hmm. What I want to do, Martin, is just to kind of analyse that in a very calm way. And I know that on other occasions you've compared discrimination against travellers to the discrimination that African Americans had in the United States. Now, I know that the discrimination that African Americans suffered, particularly in past decades, it often centred around voting rights, that they were, by hook or by crook prevented from voting, access to public transport. Obviously, Rosa Parks famously refused to give up her seat. Labour rights. Martin Luther King was in many ways a labour rights activist for, the sort of dirty jobs that blacks were essentially forced to take up. The discrimination against travellers in Ireland seems to have a different character. Would you agree that a large proportion of it surrounds residency, as to say where they live, and events that people might expect drink to be taken for? And you mentioned the wedding. Do you think that even if that discrimination is wrong, even if that's based on implying that a large proportion, that all travellers are guilty of something that maybe only a portion of them are guilty on, do you think that there's anything real in that?
No, I think there are two very visible areas where you see the manifestation of racism, and I think you've alluded to two of those yourself. One is in relation to accommodation. Okay, To me, that's the most visible manifestation of society's deep-seated racism towards travellers. I am not aware of any single instance where the local authority proposed to have a site and it wasn't objected to. There has always been objections. And then you have politicians, who are pandering to their constituents, reassuring their constituents that a traveller site will not be located in their area. So you have politicians who are unscrupulous, and who lack leadership and lack courage. And we've seen that go right to the very top, in terms of Phil Hogan, Minister for the Environment, 2 years ago, when he issued a letter to his constituents assuring them that travellers would not be accommodated in their area. And let's not forget, at the time, he was the Minister for the Environment.
Who was responsible for
housing policy in this country.
Yep.
So that's just an example that this racism permeates all levels of society. It goes right to the very top. It happens at the individual level. It happens at the institutional level. It happens in working class areas. It happens in middle class areas. It goes right to the very heart of society. And what's even more worrying about this is that this racism towards travellers, it is so embedded. It's so embedded and it's so deeply rooted in the Irish psyche that it's normalised, it's acceptable. People can say and do things about travellers that they probably wouldn't say about any other ethnic group.
Martin, I agree with you on that. I think that you're correct, and I think that there is an attitude within Irish people in general that needs to be confronted, and that people just have to be told, that's the way it's been for a long time, and it just has to change. But and obviously I'm talking to you as to a degree a representative of travellers, but would it be fair to say that the same thing has to be said in some cases to travellers. And for example, the rates of education amongst travellers, there's no doubt that travellers face discrimination in education. You've spoken about it. There was also a case that I covered about somebody not being admitted to a school because their parents hadn't been to school. Exactly. Which of course, straight off is a discrimination against travellers because, of course, their parents would not have gone to that school.
Indeed.
But isn't it also true that education traditionally, and to a large degree still, has a low status amongst many people in the travelling community, and that the nomadism of a lot of travellers who still travel is hugely disruptive to education?
Well, there's two things. One there, nomadism is no longer a reality, unfortunately, because the government have introduced various policies.
Sorry, did you say unfortunately?
Sorry?
Did you say unfortunately no longer a reality?
Yes, unfortunately it's not, because I think nomadism and the right to travel is very important, and I think it is really core to our identity as a people. But unfortunately, the government has introduced policies and legislation, namely the Housing Miscellaneous Act of 2002, which is a very punitive and a very draconian piece of law which criminalises nomadism.
In what way exactly?
Well, for example, if you're found to be travelling or to be nomadic, they can confiscate your trailer, caravan, tour de folks, but I call them a trailer. I hate the term caravan. But they can confiscate your trailer. They can dispose of your trailer. They can also fine you €3,000 or imprison you for a month.
Hang on a second. Simply travelling with a trailer or a caravan isn't a criminal offence. Lots of people arrive on the ferry from France, and Germans and French people and Dutch people and have holidays in Ireland. They don't get arrested, do they?
The problem is not actually travelling itself. The problem is so long as you don't stop. When you stop and you have no place to park, and if you're found to be parking illegally, either on private or public property, there's powers there for the Gardaí without having to go to court and get an injunction. They actually have the power to confiscate your trailer, dispose of it, and can fine you €3,000 or imprison you for a month, or indeed both. So,
how many travellers has that happened to?
It happened, to be fair, not a whole lot. But I think it's, the problem I have is what that law symbolises. I mean, this law is on our statute books, and it's directly targeted at travellers. Now, I take on board what you say, and I do accept that there hasn't been that many prosecutions under it. But I still have a problem with what it symbolises.
I can understand that, but I want to move on, and what I want to do is I want to absolutely confront what people use as their justification for discrimination. And I wouldn't deny that discrimination exists. That should be very obvious to anybody who has a pair of eyes in Ireland. But there is a perception that travellers are guilty of a disproportionate amount of crime, that a disproportionate amount of crime in Ireland is committed by travellers. Would you accept that that's probably the case?
No, I don't. I think you're right. There is that perception, but it is only a perception.
Do you absolutely refute that, for example, a disproportionate number of burglaries are committed by travellers?
Because we just don't know. That there's no evidence, there's no research to substantiate such an assertion.
Well, there's one piece of evidence that I did research. The Irish Prison Service says that in Irish prisons, traveller males...
Disproportionate representation of travellers.
No, hold on for a second. Traveller males are 11 times more likely to be in prison.
And traveller women 18 times.
23 times more likely, but that's based on very small numbers. The traveller males is 11 times based on large numbers. Do you really think... So if you think that travellers are not responsible for a disproportionate number of crimes,
I don't.
What accounts for 11 times more travellers being in prison, male travellers?
If you let me finish the point.
Go ahead, yeah.
One is, there is a perception, okay, that travellers are responsible for the disproportionate number of crimes compared to the size of the population. There is absolutely not one iota of evidence to substantiate that assertion or that claim. Are you asking me, are travellers involved in crime and criminality? Of course they are. Of course they are, just like in every other community. But travellers don't have a monopoly or copyright to crime.
I'm not sure that it's... No, Martin, I'm not sure that it's just like every other community. If travellers are not guilty for a disproportionate number of crime, why are they 11 times more likely to be in prison?
Well, if you let me... Again, if you let me...
Go ahead, focus on the reason why they're more likely to be in prison.
Okay, if you let me finish the point.
Go ahead.
I'll say this, okay. Travellers are just as capable as anybody else of committing a crime, right? I think we need to be careful because a lot of people imply that there's some sort of a genetic predisposition to criminality within the traveller community, which is not the case. The reason why there's a disproportionate number of travellers, right, in the prisons, and there's universal research that shows quite clearly that indigenous minority groups, such as the black community in America, such as the Aboriginal community in Australia, such as the Native Americans, they are disproportionately represented in the prison population, and it reflects an inherent racism within the judicial system.
Okay, let's examine that. Let's examine that. So,
okay.
First of all,
well, let's examine that. We've had judges.
No. Go. Hold on for a second. You're right that the judges have made some extremely prejudicial comments. And if you look to the United States, and for example, the research is done on drug use. Black people and white people in the US use the same drugs in more or less the same ways, in the same numbers. And black people are twice as likely to go to prison for drug offences. So you can say for every two black people in prison in the United States, one of them is there for what you might call legitimate reasons. One of them is there for reasons that might be accounted for by racism. But are you really saying that for every 11 travellers in prison, one of them is there for legitimate reasons and 10 of them are there for racist reasons?
Well, I couldn't give you a breakdown of the exact figure of how many is there as a result of racism and how many are there for other reasons. But what I do know is when you do analyse the travellers who are in prison, when you analyse what offences they have committed, you will find that in the majority of cases, is the crimes or the offences are really of a very low level. It's not serious crime. It might be, for example, driving without insurance or tax. It may be for being drunk and disorderly.
Is that an informal figures, or is there a formal study on that, Martin?
Well, I think Paul O'Mahony in Trinity College, I think he did a piece of research, it must be 10 years ago at this stage. So, you know, if you look at that, I think you'll see, and certainly from our own experience as well, that the majority of travellers who are imprisoned are for what you might call, I wouldn't call it trivial crime, but certainly of a very low level. As I say,
crime that wouldn't put a person from the general population in prison.
That's exactly what we're saying.
Martin, I can believe that a good chunk of that might be true, but I find it very difficult to believe that for every 11 travellers in prison, 10 of them are there for reasons that flow essentially from prejudice. But hold on for 1 second. I want to go to a piece.
No, don't put words in my mouth. I didn't say for every 10.
But that's the numbers. There are 11 times more. No,
I don't know
Martin.
the numbers, Willie. I don't know the numbers, but
well, I'll tell you. Can I tell you the number?
I didn't say for every 10 travellers in prison.
Well, can I tell you the number?
Because of racism.
The number is, and this is from the Irish Prison Service, that traveller men are 11 times more likely to be in prison than the general population.
Correct. Yeah, I know that. Yeah.
So if.
But I don't think any of us should be looking for very simplistic explanations. This is hugely complex.
Absolutely, but hang on, hang on a second, because what I want to do is the purpose of this podcast is to arrive, or at least to suggest solutions. And one thing, there was a horrific burglary and an attack on a family in County Tipperary 2 years ago.
Willie, I think you could almost conduct this interview without me.
No. I want to ask you a very specific question. One of the people who was recently convicted on that was a guy called Dean Byrne. He's 22 years of age. He was 20 when he went into custody, and between the time when he was 18 and 20, he clocked up 120 convictions. Yet he was free.
Willie, can I say something to you?
Yeah, please.
He is not a traveller. He's not a member of the traveller community. What people tend to forget, right, that 7-member gang, people tend to forget this very conveniently, including the media, that 7-member gang that carried out that despicable, horrible crime on the Corcoran family, they were not all travellers. 3 members of that gang were members of my community, and 4 members of the gang were members of the settled community. And I'm even a little bit loath to identify the ethnicity of those people, because it's irrelevant. The fact remains that a despicable, horrible crime was committed. But yet, the media seemed to focus, on travellers, when in fact the gang was a combination, 4 members of the settled community, and the guy you just mentioned is not a traveller.
Okay, fair enough, and I'll accept that. But I'm looking at the Irish Times report on that, and the headline on that is 7 men given prison terms ranging from 12 to 20 years for rape.
I think that's just indicative of how the media treats travellers as well. That's
how? Explain.
Well, look, the media is not value free. And the media has done a big disservice to my community over the years. It has always, stereotyped travellers as being criminals.
No, but Martin, I think you didn't hear me. The headline on it is 7 Dublin men given prison terms.
Mm-hmm.
They're identified as Dublin men. In the entire article, the word traveller doesn't appear.
Willie, I'm making a general point about the media. If you do an analysis of the media coverage, in particular the print media, right, nearly all of the print media have identified that gang as a 7-member traveller gang. And they're just factually incorrect. Just like you were there 5 minutes ago when you referred to, I think it's Dane Byrne. He is not a member of a traveller community. But still, I make the point. It's a red herring. It's totally irrelevant. The fact remains a despicable crime was committed on a family minding their own business in their own home. And the culprits admitted their guilt and are now doing their time, and rightly so.
Okay, Martin, can I say, I agree with you that for a great number of travellers, that is irrelevant. And I think it's very important that it doesn't happen that all travellers are tarred with the same brush if some traveller commits a crime. And there equally, where there do exist problems in the traveller community, it's important to confront them, and pretending that they don't.
I don't disagree with you. I
want to ask you a question based on that.
And again, that's a mistake. There's a perception out there, that traveller leaders and traveller organisations are in some way not facing up to these challenges. Nothing could be further from the truth. Every day of my life, for the last 30 years, I've been trying to deal with these issues in our community around antisocial behaviour, around criminal activity, around the high unemployment rates, around the high levels of suicide in our community, drug addiction, domestic violence. I mean, these are issues that we are trying to grapple with on a daily basis, as well as trying to address the racism from the majority population, which is creating a lot of issues for us also.
Sure. Well, and I agree with you, and I know that you've worked hard on that, and my view on that is that neither of those two things can be tackled without the other thing being tackled.
You're absolutely right, and I think that's a really important point, because, when I go to schools and I go to community groups and when I speak in the media, what they look for quite often is sound bites. And they don't want to hear about context. They don't want to hear about analysis. And the point you've just mentioned there is really a crucial point. And I've always said that you cannot separate, what's happening in the community to what's happening to the community. I think they are inextricably linked.
One other thing, and I should say that you and I perhaps disagree that there is an elevated level of a particular type of crime within travellers, but it would be important to point out there weren't any travellers there on the night of the bank guarantee. There are some crime statistics where the representation of travellers is 0. But one thing that I have to challenge you on is you would agree that there's an extremely low level of educational attainment amongst travellers.
Unfortunately, that is still the case. Now,
and there is also an extremely poor health statistics. You mentioned suicide, and that's one issue, but also, for example, maternal mortality, infant mortality, and just life expectancy. And I think I read on your own website, 55% of travellers leave school before they are 15 years of age, despite the fact that the minimum school leaving age is 16.
Yeah.
Isn't there an element?
You're absolutely right, and it is something that we're very concerned about. I mean, I value education. I promote education. All of my children, are in secondary school. I just spoke about my son Dean. He's been called a smelly, dirty knacker on 4 occasions. He wanted to leave school, but I would even dare dream about taking him out of school. So the schools also have to look at their own policies around inclusion. Schools are meant to be a welcoming, inclusive, friendly environment. Now, I'm not using this as justification. So
I understand, but I want to ask you a question.
It's very difficult for parents to send their children to school if they're facing hostility and racism on a daily basis. So there's an obligation on the schools and the Department of Education to make sure that schools are inclusive, welcoming, and respectful of differences and of diversity. Unfortunately, we are far away from that. But despite that, I still would encourage travelers to attend school. I think education is really important. It's a passport to so many opportunities in life.
I understand, and Martin, you're clearly bought in on the importance of education, but isn't it true that many members of the travellers community aren't that bought in?
No, I think it's a very important point. You mentioned that 55% of travellers cease formal education before they're 15. That is, you're right, and it's a shocking statistic. Okay? Now, you're right too. The minimum school-going age here in Ireland is 16 years of age.
Yeah.
Why is the Education Welfare Board? Why do we not have people from the Department of Education chasing up those young travellers? Why do we not have travel parents being brought to court for not sending their children to school? I think that's quite telling in itself, isn't it?
I do, and I think that's a disgrace. And I was in touch actually with the educational welfare people, and it was pretty plain from their response, and I'll put the text of their response in the webpage for this podcast. But it's pretty plain that they are treating traveller parents differently. That in instances where general population, hang on a second, in instances where a member of the general population would be prosecuted, traveller parents are not.
And I think that's really indicative of the attitude of society towards travellers. And I will make this point, and I've made it very consistently, and God knows I've made it at my own personal cost. Where traveller parents are not sending their children to school, okay, then they need to be brought before the courts. It's as simple as that. I've been very consistent. I've been very clear on that, and so is Pavee Point. Education is important. Young traveller children have rights, and I think their rights are being violated. The right to an education, if the parents don't send them to school. And if the parents don't send them to school, then the Education Welfare Board need to deal with those parents and get them before the courts.
Well, I would agree with you 100% on that. I presume you would also agree, be they traveller or be they not, someone who leaves school at very early age, particularly males who leave school at 11, 12, 13, are far more likely to be engaged in crime and drug abuse. And isn't it the case, Martin, that nomadism is just completely incompatible with both employment and education in our society in the 21st century?
Well, I don't believe it might be incompatible with it. Well, first of all, 85% of travellers are unemployed, and that's from the census of 2011. And that in itself,
how could they be otherwise?
Yeah, well, I would suggest for two reasons. One, low educational attainment, okay? But also, let's not forget, there's huge discrimination in the labour market. So there are many travellers out there, Willie, who are well qualified, who've actually gone to university and got degrees, and they can't get employment because
there
of discrimination in the labour market. Now, no, it doesn't matter. There are a number of them, and they can't get employment. So then you have other young travellers, that's 55% who cease formal education before 15 years of age. You have those looking on to other travellers in their community who have achieved great things in education, but they can't get employment. So they have no incentive. We have to incentivize young travellers, right, to stay on in education. And it's very hard to do that when you see travellers who have gone to university, who have got qualifications, but yet they can't get employment. And that's part of the vicious cycle, that we're in here as well. Nomadism, it's a myth. I mean, the small number of travellers who do travel now travel primarily during the summer, when the school is on holidays and so forth. So it's not as if they travel every single day for the whole 12 months of the year. There's certain patterns involved here, Willie, and it's primarily now during the summer when the schools are closed for holidays. So it doesn't interrupt or disrupt the children's education. Mm-hmm. And, it can be managed. It can be facilitated. It can be organised in a way that is not in conflict with education.
Martin, what about the levels of infant mortality and maternal mortality? That's to say, young babies dying and their mothers dying. Surely nomadism is completely incompatible with modern healthcare.
Well, no, that's not down to nomadism. Look, all I can say,
it's down to poor living conditions.
No, if nomadism was properly supported and properly facilitated.
By who?
With transient sites.
By who?
Which is actually government policy, by the way. It's in the 1998 Travel Accommodation Act. There's a legal obligation on local authorities to provide transient sites, but they haven't done so. So if there was a political will and a commitment, nomadism could be accommodated, it could be facilitated in a way that, is safe and healthy for people. But the problem I have here is, in Irish society, there's a mindset that defines nomadism as backward, as primitive, as stupid, right? And it must be got rid of, and we must aspire to become sedentary. So you have this mindset that being sedentary is superior and nomadism is inferior.
Well, hold on for a second. That's not an entirely irrational mindset. One of the things I have to say,
Willie, we have developed an infrastructure. We have developed institutions that support settled people's way of life and settled people's way of living. Okay?
No, we haven't. No, settled people have developed that.
We need parity of esteem. We need some investment, right, into travel identity, travel culture, and nomadism being part of that. We need to develop an infrastructure that validates and supports travel identity in the same way that we have developed an infrastructure that supports settled people's identity.
So Dan, I want to ask you a question based on that, Martin. Settled people, as you call them, the general population, pay for themselves. Nobody comes along with their paw out to the traveller community and says that you have to subsidise the lifestyle of settled people.
Well, first of all, there's a lot of settled people who are not employed and not paying taxes through no fault of their own, okay? And there is an obligation on the state. We're a welfare state. There's an obligation on the state to support those who are vulnerable, okay?
Now, hang on a second. 85% unemployment.
Travellers are willing to pay for it. I mean, we're not looking for handouts. We're not looking for,
So what are you looking for?
Willie. Travellers are willing to pay for these services. We made it very clear. And any services that the travellers get now, they pay for it. Whether that's water charges, whether it's property tax.
Do they pay the full market price? Do they pay the full market cost of that?
Yes.
So hang on a second.
There's no special allowance for us. There's no special allowance for us. We pay all the rates that the settled people. We pay rent, we pay electricity, we pay property charges, we pay water charges. So travellers have made it very clear. We're not looking for these services free of charge. We're willing to pay for them.
Martin, if 85% of travellers are unemployed, where is that payment coming from?
Well, it's like any unemployed person, whether you're a settled or traveller, there's an obligation. We're a welfare state. They're there to support you. But for travellers who are employed, just like those who are employed in the settled community, they pay their way, and rightly so.
I haven't been able to find figures on it, but I think it's fair to say that a high proportion of that 15% of travellers who are not unemployed, a high proportion of them are female. Isn't that true?
Sorry, repeat that again, please.
Of the 15% of travellers who are not unemployed, a high proportion of those are female. Isn't that true?
I couldn't give you a breakdown. I couldn't give you a gender breakdown.
Yeah, but it's relatively high.
Martin, there's a cliche out there. There's a cliche out there of
the principle here is right. It's all about values. It's all about a belief system, okay? And we have a values and belief system here, right? From the settled community, which has resulted in policies, programs, and institutions and an infrastructure that supports and validates the majority's perspective on the world.
Sure, but the funding for that has come from that majority culture.
Yeah, but there's a lot of settled people who are not employed either.
That's true, but hang on, no, Martin, let me put a specific case to you. A male traveller who left school at 10 or 11, if that, and has never held down a job in their life. That accounts for a large proportion of male travellers, doesn't it?
I don't disagree with you at all. Any person, Willie, that's unemployed, right, through no fault of their own, it might be a result of low educational attainment, it might be discrimination, I don't know what it is. But whether you're settled or traveller, right, we're a welfare state, there's an obligation on the state to make sure that there's some assistance given to those individuals so they can have a dignified existence.
Not if they're not seeking work.
Irrespective of your gender, irrespective of your ethnicity. That's the point I'm making here, but I'm making a more substantive point.
But Martin, Martin, I want to ask you
a question. Can't you understand how people who get up and work every day, and you're right that there are some settled people who are unemployed, but the rate is not comparable. But of the settled people who are unemployed, nothing compares to somebody who left school at 11, 12 or 13, started signing on when they're 18 and has never had a job in their life. What you're talking about is job seekers allowance, and very like the way that the Educational Welfare Board doesn't enforce the law on traveller parents to get them to send the children to school.
I think you missed the point. Look, I think what's implicit in your comments, which I think is offensive, and what's implicit in your comments, as far as I can make out, is that is the assumption that travellers don't want their work, right? That travellers are somehow lazy. Look at the amount of travellers who are going out there every day trying to find employment, giving in CVs, the numbers are vast, but they're coming up against a brick wall in terms of negative attitudes and discrimination. Mm-hmm. The latest piece of research we have, Willie, is from Micheál Mac Gréil, who's a sociologist from NUI Minute. Yep. And his piece of research was published in 2010. And in it, something like 80% of the respondents would refuse travellers Irish citizenship.
Sure, I actually wanted to bring up that piece of research. No, I want to bring up that piece of research because that's...
would refuse to have a traveller marry into their family. And again, I think something like 90% would not like travellers living in their area.
Yeah, well, I just want to explain, Martin, that piece of research because
I did that. This is Father Micheál Mac Gréil at NUI Maynooth, and what he does is he measures the social distance of all sorts of classes of people, including, for example, Nigerian immigrants, travellers, members of the IRA, and he asks, like, the most closest question, would you be happy to marry somebody, or would you be happy for your brother or sister to marry one of these people? And then the furthest out, would you be happy to live in the same town as somebody like this? And then the most extreme, would you want to deny Irish citizenship to these people? And you're right, travellers, as I understand it on the most recent one, actually come off as Irish people are most hostile to travellers, more hostile than to any other group. Am I correct?
Yes, that's my.
I mean, it is. I wanted to bring that up because, and I'll link to that as well. But it's an astonishing measurement of the hostility towards travellers. But what I want to do is I want to try and see some sort of way, and I think we agreed earlier that it's not possible to solve one side of the problem without solving the other. But equally on that, Martin, the lack of education amongst travellers is part of the
problem. I'll tell you what the problem here is. The problem here is the racism that emanates from the majority population, the lack of respect, the lack of inclusion of travellers in Irish society. And we've just seen manifestations of that again one more time, unfortunately, in the wake of those tragic events out in Carrickmines, where a group of local residents, mounted a protest, a blockade, blocking the bereaved families from getting temporary accommodation. Mm-hmm. It's the core issue here. Mm-hmm. It's the racism, both at the individual level and at the institutional level in this society, that my community experience almost on a daily basis.
I agree with you 100%. I agree with you 100%. That is an enormous problem. But my final question is, do you really think it is the only problem?
No, it's not the only problem, but it is the key problem. It is a core problem. And until we deal with the racism, we cannot have a truly pluralist, inclusive society that's respectful of human difference.
Martin Collins, co-director of Pavee Point Traveller and Roma Centre, thank you very much for talking to me.
Thank you very much.
Make your view heard. Dial 076 603 5060 and leave a contribution for the show. You can find tips on how to record a good contribution and other ways to contact the podcast at here'show.ie/call.
And that's almost it for episode 19 of Here's How, Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast, published on the 29th of October 2015. References for everything that I mention in the show are listed in this episode's page on the here'show.ie website. If you can think of a topic or want to suggest someone to include, and that could be you, then let me know. If you like the podcast, please go on iTunes and write a nice review. Also, please like the show on Facebook, please follow at Here's How Podcast on Twitter, and of course subscribe to the show. You can use iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, or any other podcast app or software. You can do all of that or get in touch with the show right from www.here'show.ie. Or you could just go out and tell your friends about the podcast. The next show will be uploaded shortly. The Here's How podcast is produced and presented by me, William Campbell. Thank you for listening.